Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest webinar in our series, How eIDAS Trust Services Can Benefit SME Business. My name is John Sharma. I'm chair of the European Association for E-Identity and Security, EMA, and I'll be the moderator for the webinar today. One piece of housekeeping, please bear in mind that if you can enter your questions into the chat box, then we'll be able to endeavour to answer those towards the end of the webinar. We do have a sharp cutoff today, so what we'd like to do is try and answer all the questions anyway, and that's the plan. So the agenda is as follows. We have a brief introduction by myself, and then John Swithers, Senior Research Executive at the Lisbon Council, will give an introduction to trust services and their business benefits, and then we'll carry on to present implementing trust services in your business. After that, I will be giving a practical example of implementation of trust services based on a real use case, but obviously anonymized. And then there'll be Q&A and conclusions afterwards. So we'll start off with my introduction as to why do we actually really need trust services. eIDAS is all about safe and easy use of services, trust services for all citizens as part of a digital single market. And trust services are things, as we'll talk about, all the components needed for digital transactions and to work in the digital market. And eIDAS in particular provides a consistent set of rules throughout the EU, so you can do business across the entire EU. Just to bear in mind also, there's no obligation for private sector to implement eIDAS, but its use between counterparties really does reduce risk. It's important. eIDAS is one of these regulations which apply to all member states in the EU, and eIDAS itself is simple, but it has been made to respect every member state's preferences. How do we improve adoption of eIDAS in private sector? SMEs can invest in eIDAS, and that will extend their reach to all of the EU. It addresses eID and trust services, and the idea is that by having a single playing field, you can work across the entire EU safely and confidently. This webinar will show about trust services, as I've said, and the next and fourth webinar will look specifically at the eIDAS benefits in the financial sector. So I'll pass on to John Swithers, who will start his presentations on the introduction to trust services and their business benefits. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, John, for the introduction. Now, just to give you a bit of background to those who are listening, for those of you that didn't attend the last webinar that was held on the 13th of September, we focused really on introducing the eIDAS regulation and then highlighted the electronic identification schemes, or eID, and how businesses can really reuse eID systems. And we also discussed the business benefits that this could bring. Now, this is particularly relevant, especially today, actually, because as of tomorrow, on the 29th of September, the mandatory cross-border recognition of notified eID systems under the eIDAS regulation comes into force. Now, what does this mean? This means that all EU countries will have to recognise foreign eID schemes that have been notified to the European Commission. So don't worry if you missed out on that last webinar. The recording will be uploaded, as will all of the recordings of these webinars, onto the eIDAS for SMEs website, and I will provide the URL later on throughout this webinar. Okay, so the focus of today, as John Sharma has already mentioned, today we're going to be discussing the other side of eIDAS, which are the trust services and those that are actually covered by the eIDAS regulation. So, what are trust services? Let's give a bit of an introduction. So, trust services are electronic services that aim to increase the confidence of EU citizens and businesses when carrying out electronic transactions, particularly those that take place between businesses and customers located in another country. Now, implementing the different trust service that we're going to discuss can generate a series of benefits for your company, especially about implementing them in your day-to-day business activities. Now, these benefits include better user experience, increased security and liability in your transactions, and greater efficiency gains. Now, we'll go into these benefits in more detail as we discuss each trust service in turn. Now, as we mentioned, and as you can see on your screen, there are a number of different trust services covered under the eIDAS regulation, and these all serve different purposes. So the trust services that we're going to discuss today include electronic signature or e-signature, shown by the ES on your screen, electronic timestamps or e-timestamps, as you can see by ET on your screen, electronic seals or e-seals, qualified website authentication certificates, and my favorite acronym here, which is QUACS, an electronic registered delivery service, which is eIDAS. We will now focus on each of these solutions, and let's have a look at some of the business benefits your business could receive by implementing them on their own or in collaboration with another trust service. So let's begin with e-signatures, electronic signatures. Now, this is perhaps one of the most well-known trust services, and it will ring quite clearly to you. And it is quite widely used by citizens and business alike. An e-signature is the expression in an electronic format of a person's agreement to the content of a document or set of data. Now, e-signatures were first recognised in European legislation back in 1999 through the e-signature directive. However, since July 2016, electronic signatures in the EU are now governed by the eIDAS regulation. So, why introduce e-signatures into your business processes? What are the benefits for your SME? Now, the first benefit would be to reduce cost and time through streamlined processes. By introducing the e-signature solutions, you can automate the signature process, reducing process cycles and reducing the overall cost whilst maintaining a good quality of service. It will also generate more innovative business processes for your company, so you can stand out from competitors, and it will also provide convenience for both the business and customer. For example, there is no physical presence is needed with the use of an e-signature, apart from those that are obligated by other regulations, such as, for example, in the financial sector. Now, the private sector has already begun to use e-signatures, and there's got particularly strong presence in the professional services and financial services sectors. Now, for those of you that are interested in the sectorial approach and how electronic identification schemes and trust services can be used in specific sectors, we do have 4 sectorial webinars coming up, and we will provide the URL to register for those at the end of this webinar. So moving on to the second of the trust services, let's talk about electronic timestamps or e-timestamps. E-timestamps and e-timestamp links an electronic document, let's say, for example, a purchase order or a contract, to a particular time, providing evidence that the document existed at that specific point in time. Now, e-timestamps are rarely used as a standalone solution, but are often used in addition to another trust service. For example, they're widely used in collaboration or alongside e-signatures. So what does this mean for your business? So what benefits could this solution bring to your business? So first of all, we have enhanced document tracking. So you can locate the documents, find out where they are in any of your day-to-day business processes. It also provides greater accountability in case of a dispute, as it's easy to see when a document was signed, sealed, or changed hands, for example. Moving on, we have the Qualified Website Authentication Certificates, or QWACs for short. Now, these are electronic certificates that prove to your customers that your company website is trustworthy and reliable. These certificates also ensure that the website is linked to the person to whom the certificate is registered. So you know when you are browsing on a website that has one of these certificates that it is trustworthy and reliable. So what are the benefits here for your company? Firstly, we have increased consumer trust. Now, as we know, gaining trust of customers is essential for any business, and greatly contributes to increasing customer satisfaction and also retaining customers. So the first benefit would be increased consumer trust. Secondly, these certificates also help avoid data phishing. So this fraudulent attempt to use your customers' personal data for malicious reasons, usually. So it helps prevent data phishing, which in turn also generates trust amongst your customers. Moving on, we have electronic seals or e-seals. Now, these e-seals are actually similar in their function to the traditional business stamp. They can be applied to a set of data or a document to firstly guarantee the identity of the sender. So the recipient can be assured that the document came from the appropriate person. So it came from who it's meant to come from. And secondly, the e-seals ensure that the integrity of the business document and that it has not been manipulated in any form on its travels. Now, I think the benefits here are pretty clear from what I've just said, but we have mainly the reduced cost through streamlined processes. This is the automation of the traditional business stamp process, and the generation of greater trust in the origin of the document. So we know where this document has come from and it's not been tampered with. Finally, we have the Electronic Registered Delivery Service, or eIDAS, as its acronym says. And now this allows the user to send data electronically, providing proof of sending and delivery of a document, and protecting your company, and this is the important part, against the risk of loss, theft, damage, or unauthorized alterations. Now, the benefits here include reduced time and cost in the document in the exchange of documents, so no need for couriers, for example, and increased efficiency and trust in your company, and also enhanced document tracking to keep. When we're talking about trust services, they are often separated into two groups, and it would be the qualified and the non-qualified trust services. So what does this actually mean? So the term qualified is used for those trust service providers who can prove that the trust services provided by them fulfill the requirements laid down in the eIDAS regulation. Now, the non-qualified trust services are not necessarily less trustworthy. They often provide solutions that are similar to those offered by the qualified trust service providers. However, they're non-qualified because they may have not gone through the official process to ensure that the services provided by them comply with the requirements under the eIDAS regulation. So if you want to find a trust service provider, you can access the trusted list browser, and the URL is provided there. Though the qualified trust services are actually identified by the EU trust mark. which is a blue lock in a circle. So that will help you identify those, but both qualified and non-qualified can be found on the trusted list browser. So let's move on to the second half of the presentation. So let's see how we can actually implement these trust services into a business process. So let's put it into a bit of context and see how this can be done. So I'd like you to imagine a scenario. Imagine you run a business in Valencia in Spain, and this business specializes in arranging logistics for the transport of goods. Now, you are contacted by a customer who is based in Portugal, who urgently needs you to transport, or your company, sorry, to transport highly valuable artworks from Spain to France within the time period of 48 hours. So they've seen that you have the urgent international transport service that is offered on your company website, and they wish to use it. So let's now look at the business process within this scenario. So as we said, you're based in Spain, in Valencia in Spain. Now this client in Portugal urgently wants you to transport these artworks from Valencia in Spain to Marseille in France within the time period of 48 hours. They contact you via the online chat on your company website, and your company automatically realizes that they need here two carriers. The carrier one that will transport the artworks from the port of Valencia to the port of Marseille by boat, and then carrier two that will continue the journey with the transport of the artworks from the port of Marseille to the client by van. So your company draws up the contract of carriage for both carriers and uses an e-seal to seal the contracts of carriage, so to prove their origin, so where they've come from, and also their integrity, so they can't be manipulated on their transport to the carriers. And you also apply you also ask for an e-timestamp to be used on the documents when the goods change carrier. So when they change carrier from carrier one to carrier two. And this in turn, the use of these two trust service solutions at this point in the process can lead to a reduction in costs through streamlined processes and also enhanced document tracking. So once we've sent through we then send through the documentation to the carriers using an electronic registered delivery service. Now this greatly reduces time in document exchange. We don't have to rely on the use of couriers or the cost of couriers here. So there's also a reduction in cost. And also we are protected as a company against loss, theft, damage or alterations of this documentation. The two transport carriers, carrier one and carrier two, agree and sign the documentation, and the transport of the artworks begins. So carrier one transports the goods from Valencia to Marseille, as you can see with the ship in the picture, and then carrier two transports the artworks from Marseille to the final destination. Now, unfortunately, the artworks arrive 4 hours after the 48-hour allotted time, so there is a delay which causes problems for the client. And by checking the e-timestamps on the document exchange during the process, your company can determine that it was actually the fault or the responsibility of carrier two as the van got held up in traffic on way to their final destination. So here we have another benefit of greater accountability. Now, this is just one of many different examples of how trust service solutions can be incorporated into business processes. And now I just want to explain a few more tools that are available for you, for businesses, to really encourage the uptake of electronic ID and trust service solutions in business processes. For example, we have a set of downloadable infographics for different sectors, providing different sectorial examples for the financial services sector, the online retail sector, the transport sector, as we've just discussed, and also the professional services sector. So there you have the URL to download these infographics. Please do not worry. As we mentioned, we will also upload this presentation onto the website, so you will have access to all of the information. So please don't worry and scrabble around trying to write down this URL. Another one of the tools that is available is an SME checklist. So this is a downloadable checklist which aims to help businesses find out or discover which trust service solution best meets their business needs. So it takes you through a series of questions asking what are the current business needs, and then leads you to an appropriate solution to address those needs. And that is also available for download on the website. And moving on, we also, from a more practical point of view, and to allow users to kind of test out these trust service solutions and electronic identification schemes, there is an interactive tool which is located on the URL on your screen, which really allows the users to be taken through business processes to see what it's like to incorporate or implement these trust service solutions into the business processes. And this is available again on the website, and it's a very interactive way of using these trust service solutions and discovering the benefits for your company of doing so. We also there is also an SME guidebook available, which will help businesses understand the basic concepts related to trust services and also to electronic identification. The guidebook also provides an introduction to the eIDAS regulation and how it will affect businesses, and provides sectorial examples of the use of trust services and electronic identification schemes by businesses themselves. Now, this is actually downloadable, and it's a very quick and easy reference guide. It's only about 20 pages, I think, so it's an easy resource to start with if you're fairly unfamiliar with eIDAS and trust services. On the final screen, well, the penultimate screen, I should say, all of these aforementioned materials, tools, etc., can be found for download on the eIDAS for SMEs web pages that can be found on the Digital Single Market website on the following URL. If you are keen on keeping up to date with news, the events, the following webinars, for example, then please do follow the Twitter account, which is @eid_EU, where we use the hashtag eIDAS for SMEs, and also check out the Digital Single Market Facebook group. If you'd like to even become more involved, we encourage you to join the discussion around eIDAS, especially related to how it affects small and medium-sized businesses in Europe. And there is an eIDAS observatory, and the link is provided in the presentation, where you can discuss these eIDAS related issues with other organisations and like-minded businesses. Now, it's a virtual community of stakeholders, and where you can discuss these issues related to the uptake of eIDAS solutions, and also with the aim of helping to promote the use of cross-border eID and trust services in Europe. Now, the observatory is open to everybody, businesses, individuals, public administrations, and again, we aim here to, well, the aim here of the community is to promote knowledge sharing and to develop initiatives for innovation. So on that note, I'm now going to hand over to John Shammer, who's going to take our what's been said so far in this presentation and provide a practical example of the implementation of eIDAS. So take it away, John.
Thank you very much. Just as a refresher, electronic eIDAS trust services cover a variety of different services: electronic signatures, electronic seals, timestamping, registered delivery, and website authentication. What this example is going to cover is electronic signatures, electronic seals, and stamping. Validation services we've not really discussed. It's part of validating electronic signatures and seals, which happens automatically as required to ensure that they're correct. eIDAS is really a regulation for complying services to be accepted across the entire EU. Imagine it as trying to build a level playing field. And that means that if you are an organization that has undertaken digital transformation or is looking to undertake digital transformation, your markets have suddenly grown from your home country to across the entire EU. That means not only are you able to work with customers which are outside your own country within the EU, but also if your own organization is distributed across 2 or more member states, then you're able to use and utilize digital signatures safely and confidently on that level playing field as well. Moving on. Onto the next slide. Right. Yeah, so if you look at a typical process, this is actually, if I may say, from a real example, but I can't actually give you the name of the organization, but this is going to be pretty typical for most organizations. If you look at the relationship, whether you're buy side or sell side, the first part of this a transaction will be finding your trading partner, being sure that trading partners are real. Now, in the real world, of course, very few people work blindly with counterparties. If it's of any value, they want to be sure that the counterparty is known a little bit. So finding a trading partner is important. Then there'll be a bid and an offer, and then the selection of the the seller, and then there'll be the acceptance of that bid so that the transaction can move forward. Now that works either way in business to business or business to consumer, but it's the same rough process. Now, your own business may be slightly different to this, but you'll get the general gist of it from this particular example. We've added in a section of obtaining credit and assessing the credit and obtaining credit. So there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, if you're a buyer, you may want credit to buy the product or service. If you're a seller, you may want to check that credit to be sure you're happy, but also actually the seller themselves may wish to obtain credit to finance that service before they get paid, or to finance the components that they have to assemble or whatever, which form part of the manufacture if it's a product. Then once that's all agreed or obtained, then the contracts are exchanged and negotiated and signed on both sides, obviously. And then the invoicing and logistics, supply, invoicing, etc. after that. Payment later, depending on the terms, of course. Now, this is a This is a standard process, whether it's digital or not. A digital transformation, and we'll go through that, will provide this and speed this whole process up, and we'll look at the savings around that. And then let's see, we'll look at applying that in the eIDAS scenario of working across the entire EU. So online trust is essentially at each of these stages, each of these trade stages along the transaction cycle. And it can be, as I said, product or services, or in fact, information exchange will be similar, slightly different, but similar. So let's look at that process and some of the actions that are going to be taken. From finding a trading partner component of this, you'll probably want to look at the um, identity of the query, of the counterparty, not only necessarily the identity themselves of the individual, but you'll want to then check up whether the levels are right and their permissions are right to work within their organizations. So knowing who you're dealing with is very important. At this first stage, it will be probably the technical buyer and the commercial buyer looking at the sales manager from the seller side to make sure what's going on. And the use of eID is very important there. It's not really what we're talking about today, because that's the eID side of eIDAS and was covered previously. We'll move on to the bid selection part. Sorry, if we can just go back a slide. Yeah. Sorry, to the bid selection part, where you'll see there's quite a number of players in this component, in this area. First off, you want to issue the call, in fact. So the technical buyer will want to sign off that that call is correct, or the request for information is sure. The commercial buyer will want to sign off to make sure that to confirm that there is actually money to purchase this or provisions in place to purchase a service or product. From the sales side, similarly, there'll be the sales manager will need to look at this call and will need to sign off any response. The bid manager will need to sign off the bid process. In many companies, there'll be a risk manager involved, making sure, counting the risk and assessing the risk of responding. Finance manager who will actually say, yes, we can afford to do this. It's not going to cost us too much money in providing the service. You may or may not have any of these signature components, but in this particular business case that I was referring to, or I'm using as a base, they had all of these persons in the loop here. So that's a large number of signatures. Next step is obtaining credit, and the bid manager and the finance manager and the risk manager may wish to coordinate with a credit manager and risk manager who are in green, which means that they may not be they may be internal or external, in fact. And the buyer, similarly, the commercial buyer may look at whether they can finance it or not, as the case may be. After this, you have contracts and the purchase order, where there'll be the bid manager will sign, the commercial buyer will sign, and the finance officer will probably countersign as well. After the service or product has been delivered and the transaction has taken place, there will be either delivery, which we talked about previously, John talked about previously, and e-invoicing, invoicing where the invoicing document will need to be signed, obviously by the sales manager and the finance manager, and the technical buyer will need to sign off when it's been received for payment. Commercial buyer will need to sign off to say it's okay, and the finance officer will need to sign off as well. Interestingly, here on the e-invoice, there may be a company seal from the organization from the for the e-invoicing. I'm sorry, Mike, that should be actually a little bit lower down, and that will enable that the invoice itself and the payment and all the rest will be identified as being coming from the real company. Afterwards, the payments will need to be signed off by the finance manager that it's been received, and the buyer financial officer to say that he's made that payment. So all of these are part of the digital transformation. We'll look at the timing in a minute, estimates in timing, because everybody is different. But imagine all of these actors, they can all be in different countries. You can have, if your organization, if the sales organization may have the bid management in one particular country, or they may have a sales manager not in the same country as the finance manager, etc., etc. A lot of companies may have small offices dotted around the EU. The same from the purchasing organization. They may have their finance officer in a different place to the technical buyer who may be wanting it for a specific geography. So there's quite a wide variety of communications going between various countries, and signing which needs to be trusted to be sure that if you're using an eID or you're using an identity issued in that particular country, that you're sure that they're all on the same playing field, especially if you're working with different organizations. So when you're actually crossing between the buyer and the seller in different countries, there's that question where we are not sure exactly whether the playing field is level, and you know exactly all the terms that these IDs and the signing has all taken place. So it's important to try and find a level playing field if you want to work across Europe. If you're all working in the same country, it's not a problem. It's when you're working cross-border in Europe generally, and you want to expand the market out so that you can accept products from other countries within Europe or international organizations, it makes life very, very lower risk. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Moving on. So if you look in the traditional paper-driven system, these are some estimates that were done from the example organization, and the prices that I've put on for each of the costs rather for each of the components here are very much estimated for that particular organization, and it includes that indirect costs as well as direct costs. Everyone will be different, so just take these and you can do the calculation yourself for your own organization. But from this particular case, we estimated the cost of a signature on a piece of paper around about 50 euros by the time the contract was brought to the signer. It was on his desk, it was moved around, etc., etc. The documents themselves, if they're produced in paper, and we're talking about paper-driven at the moment, is about 200 euros per document. It's likely to be 10 pages. You can have people typing it, printing it out, reprinting, moving around, shuffling them around, so they can be signed and moved to the 11 people. There'll be internal costs as well, mainly. This is where it's from. And then if you're working around in different parts of the organization from the sales side, sending it to the buyer and the negotiations, you're talking about maybe 5 courier activities and estimate 100 euros each by the time you phone to book the courier, get it ready, pack it, make sure the courier picks up the document and sends it off. From the buy side, you've got about 9 signatures, estimated in this particular case 10 documents and 5 couriers. So the cost for sales side bid administration on this was around about 3,500 euros. And these are not small deals, but they're medium-sized deals, not unheard of. And the buy side bid administration was about similar amount, 2,950 euros. What's frightening also is the time it would probably take to go through all these steps. And these steps would take probably around about 1 to 2 months. This is what was found in the sample organization. It took about that time. By the time the couriers came and went, by the time you had a few holidays and people off for a little bit, it took about 1 to 2 months. You couldn't always coordinate everybody's location where they were, especially with paper, of course. You have times when a document that needs signing off may be following from one office to another, following the individual. Luckily, a lot of people have moved away and invested into digital signatures and using digital transformation in this. And from the digital side, you actually have, obviously, with the same number of signatures and documents, vastly reduced costs, almost minimal costs. Your own organization may put some overheads into these, but there's an order of magnitude less in cost. And the duration of that transaction, because you can get signatures much quicker and decisions quicker and transfers quicker, you lose the courier costs and timing and everything and all the benefits that you'd have from digital transformation. So typically you would say a maximum of say 2 weeks for a similar transaction if you have digital transformation processes in this. Now that's normal. That would be for any digital transformation within your own member state. The issue is when you're outside operating in different member states, then you're not able to do this without eIDAS providing reduced risk. You can, but the risk is much higher. So you have this saying, you have an associated investment in digital transformation. And if you do that, then you're able to extend that to customers across the entire EU digital single market. You'll be able to have all of these components in offices that could be distributed across any number of member states. You could have, as I said, you could have offices in, say, Belgium and the Netherlands and Luxembourg, or France or Germany. And if you have smaller offices, even smaller offices, this makes life very quick and easy and very risk-free, especially if you're working with products or services that may need auditing later on, and that happens sometimes as well. So using eIDAS, it's now possible to realize these savings for businesses with offices across Europe as well, and for sales across the entire single market. Maybe one organization, but the customer that you have may be, or your counterparty may have offices all over the EU as well. And if you're looking for sales, of course, and you're looking into the business to consumer side, suddenly you're opening up to a much, much bigger market. So in summary, these benefits, which were originally limited to home member states, the benefits of digital transformation, which are significant, can now reach the entire EU single market with the use of the eIDAS trust services. It can significantly improve your ROI on that digital transformation investment and will continue to provide benefit as you go to truly work in a single digital market. So with that point, I'd like to move on to any questions that there are. I've not seen any listed at the moment. If anybody would like to, then that's fine. Otherwise, I will do some conclusion and ask John Swithers if he wants to make a conclusion. I will produce my own. I will then offer my own conclusions, and then we'll close the webinar a little bit early. So, John Swithers, is there anything that you would like to say in conclusion?
Yes, thanks, John, for the presentation. I would just like to reiterate what I mentioned at the end of the project. I know that often there's quite a lot of information out there, and what the eIDAS for SMEs web pages aim to do is to provide all of that information uh, in one kind of space so that businesses can access it. And find it, and it's quite almost easy to access and digestible information for you. So please don't hesitate to go back over this presentation, visit the website, have a play around, and use and share the material that's there. And hopefully it will be of benefit to you. And also from my side, I just wanted to invite you all again to join the upcoming webinars that will be on the different sectors that we've mentioned through the webinar today. So please do visit the webpage and register for one of those. And if you do have any questions after this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email. So don't hesitate to drop myself or John Shamar a line if you'd rather ask it privately. I just wanted to thank you all for your attendance, and I'll hand back over to John for his conclusions.
Thank you very much. Honestly, eIDAS is a real game changer for organizations that have started the digital transformation process or are hoping to start soon and are looking for a speedier ROI. If you, from a business consumer point of view, it really does mean that you can address a much, much larger market with very little effort from the commercial process side. And it means that ROIs and your business itself will benefit greater, and you'll be able to take advantage of the whole digital single market. If you are actually in the business to business side, and you as an organization may have offices scattered across a couple of countries, or you may have your finance officer and your main headquarters in one place, and your bid or technical department somewhere else, or a couple of technical teams around with small commercial sales teams around in markets in different countries, then the ability of managing digital transformation with local signatures, accepting local signatures, and with the counterparties as well in any sales, there's real advantages. So on that note, I'll just say about the next webinar, which is taking place on October the 11th at 1 p.m. CET, and that will be eIDAS tools, specifically looking in the financial sector. And as I said previously, there's more information on that and all the webinars in the series on the website that you can see at the moment, the URL, which is eIDAS for SMEs. If you actually put eIDAS SME in the web, in your search engine, you'll find that website as well. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. Thank you very much indeed. As John says, if you wish to ask questions separately outside of this environment, please send them to John or myself, and we'll endeavor to answer them or put you into the right direction. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your attendance, and I hope we've helped. Thank you very much indeed.